The last thing Marcus Reed expected on a quiet Saturday morning was to become the target of a man who had never learned the difference between confidence and cruelty. Marcus was 41, a single father, and the head janitor at a large martial arts academy in a busy American city. Every morning before the students arrived, he unlocked the side entrance, swept the training floor, cleaned the mirrors, emptied the trash, and made sure the equipment was ready for the instructors. To most people, he was simply the quiet janitor who kept the academy clean. Few knew that Marcus had once spent years studying martial arts. Even fewer knew that he had personally trained 3 national champions before walking away from competition. Marcus never talked about his past because he had no interest in impressing anyone. His only priority now was raising his 12-year-old son, Noah, after losing his wife several years earlier. Noah was the reason Marcus worked long hours, saved every dollar he could, and avoided unnecessary trouble. He wanted his son to grow up believing that strength was not about making people afraid. It was about protecting those who could not protect themselves. That Saturday, the academy was hosting an open training session. Several experienced fighters had arrived from different clubs, and among them was a 28-year-old black belt named Derek Stone. Derek was tall, muscular, and extremely confident. He had won several regional competitions and had developed a reputation for humiliating beginners during demonstrations. The students admired his skill, but some instructors privately disliked his attitude. Derek loved attention. He wanted everyone to know that he was the strongest person in every room he entered. When Marcus quietly walked past him, carrying a bucket and cleaning supplies, Derek looked at him and laughed. "Hey, janitor," he called. Marcus stopped but did not turn around. "Yeah?" Derek smirked. "Careful around the mats. Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself." A few students laughed awkwardly. Marcus simply smiled and continued cleaning. He had heard comments like that before. People often judged him by his uniform, his age, and the mop in his hand. Marcus had learned a long time ago that arguing with insecure people only gave them what they wanted. Noah was sitting on a bench near the entrance, working on his school project while waiting for his father to finish his shift. He looked up when he heard Derek's voice. "Dad, are you okay?" Marcus nodded. "I'm fine, buddy." Derek heard the exchange and walked closer. "That's your son?" he asked. Marcus nodded. Derek looked at Noah and then back at Marcus. "You should teach him some self-defense, unless you're worried he'll end up fighting like his dad," Marcus calmly replied. "He knows enough to stay out of fights." Derek laughed. "That's probably because you do too," Marcus ignored him and continued cleaning. Derek's smile disappeared. Slightly. He was not used to being ignored. He wanted a reaction, and Marcus refused to give him one. Later, during a break, Derek began demonstrating a series of techniques for several younger students. He moved quickly, knocking pads from an instructor's hands and showing off his speed. Everyone watched. Marcus was cleaning the far side of the room when Derek suddenly shouted, "Hey, Marcus, come here." Marcus looked over. Derek tossed a training pad onto the floor. "Hold this." Marcus walked over and picked it up. "Why?" Derek grinned. "Because I want to show everyone how hard I can hit." Marcus immediately understood what Derek was trying to do. He calmly said, "I'm working." Derek stepped closer. "It's just for fun." Marcus shook his head. "Find someone else." The room became quiet. Derek's pride was clearly wounded. He stepped directly in front of Marcus and said, "You afraid?" Marcus looked at him for several seconds. He was not afraid. He was remembering the promise he had made to himself years earlier. Never use his training unless absolutely necessary. His son was watching. Marcus did not want Noah to learn that violence was the answer to disrespect. "I'm not interested in fighting you," Marcus said. Derek laughed loudly. "I knew it." Several students looked uncomfortable. Then Derek reached out and shoved Marcus hard in the shoulder. Marcus took one step backward but remained balanced. The room went silent. Noah stood up immediately. "Dad!" Marcus raised one hand, telling his son to stay back. Derek smiled. "Relax, it was just for fun." Marcus looked at him calmly. "Don't do that again." Derek stepped forward and shoved him a second time. Harder. This time, Marcus caught Derek's wrist before he could pull his hand away. The movement was so quick that most people barely saw it happen. Derek's smile disappeared. Marcus did not squeeze his wrist or hurt him. He simply held it firmly enough to stop the aggression. "I said don't," Marcus repeated. Derek tried to pull free, but Marcus released him immediately. The room remained silent. One of the senior instructors stared at Marcus with a strange expression. He had seen that movement before. It was not the reaction of an ordinary janitor. Derek became angry. "Who taught you that?" Marcus looked down at his cleaning supplies. "Nobody important." The instructor suddenly stepped forward. His name was Coach Alvarez, and he had been teaching at the academy for more than 20 years. He looked at Marcus carefully. "Marcus Reed?" Marcus nodded. Coach Alvarez's eyes widened. "Are you the same Marcus Reed who trained Daniel Brooks, Ethan Cole, and Javier Morales?" The room erupted into whispers. Derek looked confused. Those three names were legendary among the students. They were former national champions who had all credited an unknown coach for transforming their careers. Marcus quietly said, "They trained hard. I only showed them what I knew." Derek stared at him. "You're that Marcus?" Marcus shrugged. "That was a long time ago." Coach Alvarez shook his head. "You trained 3 national champions. You were one of the best coaches in the state." Marcus looked uncomfortable. "I stopped years ago." Derek's confidence began to crack. But instead of apologizing, his pride pushed him further. "Then prove it." Marcus shook his head. "I don't have anything to prove." Derek stepped closer. "You think you're better than me?" Marcus answered quietly, "No, I think you have nothing to prove either." That answer somehow angered Derek more than any insult could have. He demanded a match. Marcus refused. The students gathered around, sensing the tension. Noah stood beside his father's cleaning cart, watching nervously. Finally, Coach Alvarez stepped between them. "Enough." But Derek was not finished. He pointed at Marcus and said, "Tomorrow. 1 round, no excuses." Marcus picked up his mop and walked away. He did not answer. That night, Marcus and Noah returned to their small apartment. Noah was unusually quiet during dinner. Finally, he asked, "Dad, are you really a martial arts champion?" Marcus smiled. "No, I was a coach." Noah looked amazed. "Then why didn't you tell me?" Marcus looked at his son and said, "Because being good at fighting isn't what makes a person strong." Noah thought about that. "But what are you going to do tomorrow?" Marcus paused. He knew Derek would probably return, and he knew that refusing forever might allow the young man to continue believing. That strength meant intimidation. Marcus had no desire to fight for his reputation, but he also knew there were moments when someone had to teach an important lesson. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the academy before sunrise. He cleaned the floor as usual. But when he entered the main training hall, he found Derek already waiting in the center of the mat. Around him stood several students, instructors, and unexpected guests. Marcus recognized 3 familiar voices among them. 3 former champions he had trained years ago had returned after hearing what happened. They stood silently near the wall, watching their old coach. Derek looked around and smiled confidently. "Ready, Janitor?" Marcus placed his cleaning cloth on the bench and slowly stepped onto the mat. He looked toward his son, who had just entered the room. Noah was nervous, but Marcus gave him a reassuring smile. Then Marcus turned toward Derek. "I'll give you 1 round," he said. "But you're going to learn something today." And for the first time, the entire academy became completely silent. Derek stood in the center of the training floor, rolling his shoulders and smiling as though he had already won. Around him, students whispered excitedly. They had come expecting to see the quiet janitor get embarrassed by one of the academy's strongest black belts. What they did not understand was that Marcus had never stepped onto the mat to prove that he was better than anyone. He had spent years teaching young fighters that the greatest victory was learning when not to use your strength. Marcus looked across the room and saw his son Noah standing beside Coach Alvarez. Noah looked worried. Marcus gave him a small nod, reminding him to stay calm. Then Marcus looked back at Derek. "Before we begin," Marcus said, "there's one rule." Derek laughed. "What rule?" Marcus replied. "You don't attack when someone isn't ready." Derek rolled his eyes. "Fine." Coach Alvarez stepped forward and announced the beginning of the round. The moment the signal sounded, Derek rushed forward. He threw a fast combination, expecting Marcus to panic. Marcus moved calmly, stepping just outside the attacks. He did not strike back. Derek attacked again, faster this time. Marcus shifted his position and avoided every move with minimal effort. The students began whispering. Derek's expression changed from confidence to frustration. He was accustomed to opponents reacting emotionally, but Marcus remained completely calm. After another exchange, Derek lunged forward. Marcus gently redirected his momentum and sent him, stumbling several feet across the mat. Derek recovered quickly and stared at him. Marcus simply said, "You're moving too fast." Derek became angry. "Stop talking and fight." Derek charged again. Marcus stepped aside, controlled Derek's arm, and used a simple technique to bring him safely to the mat. He released him immediately. There was no unnecessary force, no dramatic strike, no attempt to hurt him. The entire exchange lasted only seconds. The room became completely silent. Derek stood up, breathing heavily. His face was red with embarrassment. "Do it again," he demanded. Marcus shook his head. "You already understand." Derek shouted, "I don't understand anything." Marcus looked at him and said, "That's the problem. You're trying to win a fight that nobody asked you to have." The three former champions standing near the wall smiled quietly. They remembered those exact words. Marcus had taught them the same lesson years earlier. One of them, Daniel Brooks, stepped forward and said, "Coach, you haven't changed." Derek looked at him in disbelief. "You know this guy?" Daniel laughed. "He taught me everything I know." Another champion, Ethan Cole, nodded. "He trained me after I lost 6 fights in a row." Javier Morales added, "And he taught me that confidence without discipline is just arrogance." The students looked at Derek. The man who had seemed unbeatable only minutes earlier suddenly looked very small. Derek lowered his head. For the first time, he seemed embarrassed for the right reason. He looked at Marcus and said, "Why didn't you tell anyone who you were?" Marcus stepped off the mat and picked up his cleaning cloth. "Because it doesn't matter." Derek stared at him. "You trained 3 champions. How can that not matter?" Marcus smiled slightly. "Their trophies belong to them. Their discipline belongs to them. I was only their teacher." Noah walked toward his father. "Dad, that was amazing." Marcus smiled and put an arm around him. "Remember what I told you? Being strong isn't about hurting people." Noah nodded. "It's about protecting people." Marcus smiled. "Exactly." Derek heard those words and looked down. He finally understood that the man he had mocked had never been weak. Marcus simply had nothing to prove. Derek approached Marcus slowly. "I'm sorry." Marcus looked at him. "For what?" Derek swallowed. "For shoving you, for making fun of you, for treating you like you were beneath me." Marcus nodded. Apology accepted. Derek seemed surprised by how easily Marcus forgave him. "That's it?" he asked. Marcus smiled. "What else do you want?" Derek shook his head. "I don't know," Marcus replied, "then learn from it." Coach Alvarez then asked Marcus whether he would consider teaching another class at the academy. Marcus laughed and said he was too busy being a janitor. Everyone laughed. But Daniel stepped forward and said, "Coach, you're still the best teacher I've ever had." Marcus looked at the 3 champions. They were no longer young beginners. They had successful careers, families, and businesses of their own, yet they still called him coach. That meant more to Marcus than any medal ever had. Later that afternoon, Marcus sat outside the academy with Noah. They ate sandwiches together while watching students train through the windows. Noah asked his father whether he would ever return to coaching. Marcus thought about it. For years, he had avoided martial arts because the death of his wife had changed his priorities. He had wanted to focus entirely on Noah, but now he realized that returning did not mean abandoning his family. Perhaps it meant sharing something valuable with another generation. A few weeks later, Marcus began teaching a small evening class twice a week. He still worked as the academy's janitor during the day because he liked the simplicity of the job and needed the income. But in the evenings, students gathered around him to learn discipline, patience, and technique. Derek became one of his students. At first, Derek struggled with the humility required to learn from someone he had once mocked. But Marcus never humiliated him. Instead, he challenged him to become better. One evening, Derek asked Marcus, "Coach, why didn't you beat me when you had the chance?" Marcus smiled. "Because I wasn't trying to beat you." Derek frowned. "Then what were you trying to do?" Marcus looked toward Noah, who was helping organize training equipment. "I was trying to make sure my son saw his father choose discipline over anger." Derek nodded slowly. "I understand now." Months later, Derek became one of the academy's most disciplined instructors. He stopped humiliating beginners and began encouraging them. He often told new students about the day a janitor taught him the most important lesson of his martial arts career. The story spread through the academy, but Marcus never cared about the attention. One evening, after everyone had left, Marcus locked the doors and began cleaning the training floor. Noah walked beside him carrying a small towel. "Dad," he said, "you know you're not really just the janitor anymore." Marcus laughed. "What am I then?" Noah smiled. "You're Coach Marcus." Marcus stopped for a moment and looked toward his son. He could not see every detail of the academy around him, but he could hear the familiar sounds of students training in the distance. He smiled and placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. He had once believed that his greatest achievements were behind him. He had trained 3 champions, walked away from competition, and dedicated his life to raising his son. But now he understood something deeper. His greatest victory had never been a championship. It was becoming the kind of man his son could look up to, and that was a victory no trophy could ever measure.